Welcome to Order Militarist Radio TV, and today we are beginning to go through what is called the miracle of the Vistula River. A lot of details about how it all started and how the Polish state started. So we start today with all that introduction information. And today's host, Brother Alexis Bonello.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on. It's an honor for me to host this program about Our Lady's love for the Polish people and the Polish nation, and how she, from heaven, gave her blessing on the resurgence of the Polish state after 2 centuries of being foreign domination, which occurred after the First World War. This wonderful miracle, where actually in battle, Our Lady appeared. So first, let's begin with how was it that the modern Polish state came into being?
This is taken from Warsaw 1920, Lenin's Failed Conquest of Europe by Adam Zamowski. And you can get it on Amazon. It's a really good little book. And don't let the size fool you. It is packed full with information. Before the Stalin government took over after Lenin, the documents for the Red Army was quite available, so he was able to get a lot of stuff that most don't know about. And we're going to hear a lot about it. Now, how Poland began was after all the treaties were signed in the First World War. And it says, the Poles seized their chance. Under the pressure from President Wilson, the Allies had already decided that the post-war settlement should include an independent Poland. They had been granted recognition to a Polish National Committee based in Paris, which was preparing to form a provisional government. But they had no authority in German-occupied Poland and no influence at all over the Bolshevik rulers of Russia, whose government they did not recognize. It was clear that the fate of Poland would be decided on the ground rather than in the conference room, and with Russia floundering in her own problems. The Poles, or rather one Pole, took initiative.
And who is this Pole? And tell us something about him and his jaded past, you might say.
Yeah. His name was Józef Piłsudski. He was born in 1867 into the minor nobility and brought up in the cult of Polish patriotism. In his youth, he embraced socialism, seeing in it the only force that could challenge the Tsarist regime and promote the cause of Polish independence. His early life reads like a novel, with time in Russia and German gales punctuating his activities as polemist, publisher of clandestine newspapers, political agitator, bank robber, terrorist, and urban guerrilla leader. In 1904, Piłsudski put aside political agitation in favor of a paramilitary organization. He organized his followers into fighting cells that could take on small units of Russian troops or police. A couple years later, in anticipation of the coming war, he set up a partition of Poland, which soon grew into an embryonic army. On the eve of the Great War, Austria-Hungary recognized this as a Polish legion, with the status of irregular auxiliaries fighting under their own flag. In August 1914, Piłsudski was able to march into Russian-occupied territory and symbolically reclaim the name of Poland. He fought alongside the Austrians against Russia for the next couple of years, taking care to underline that he was fighting for Poland, not for the Central Powers. In 1916, the Germans attempted to enlist the support of the Poles by creating a kingdom in Poland out of some of their Polish lands, promising to extend it and give it full independence after the war. They persuaded the Austrians to transfer the Legion's effectives, which had grown to some 20,000 men, into a new Polish army under German command of the Polnische Wehrmacht. Pilsudski, who had been seeking an opportunity to disassociate himself from the Austrian-German camp in order to have his hands free when the war ended, refused to swear the required oath of brotherhood with the German army and was promptly interned in the fortress of Magdeburg. His legion was disbanded, with only a handful joining the Polish Wehrmacht and the rest going into hiding. They did not have to hide for long. Pilsudski was set free at the outbreak of revolution in Germany and arrived in Warsaw on 11th November 1918, the day the armistice was signed in the West, while his former legionaries emerged from hiding and disarmed the bewildered German garrison. He proclaimed the resurrection of the Polish Republic under his own authority. Pilsudski was 51 years old, rough-hewn, solid, and gritty. He invariably wore the simple gray tunic of a ranker of the Legion. His pale face with its high and broad forehead, drooping mustache, and intense eyes was theatrical in the extreme. None of the usual amenities of civilized intercourse, but all the apparatus of a somber genius, one British diplomat noted on the first meeting him. Pilsudski felt that 30 years spent in the service of his enslaved motherland gave him the indisputable right to leadership. His immense popularity in Poland seemed to endorse this, but that was not the view of the victorious allies in the West, nor the Polish National Committee waiting in Paris to assume power in Poland. After some negotiation, a deal was struck whereby the lion-maned pianist Ignacy Jan Paderewski, who had devoted himself to promoting the cause of Poland and Britain, France, and particularly America, and was trusted by the leaders of those countries, came from Paris to take over as prime minister, with Pilsudski remaining titular head of state and commander-in-chief, while he was allowed Paderewski to run the day-to-day business of the government and its relations with the Allies. Pilsudski continued to direct policy in all essentials, and he had the firm ideas on how to ensure the survival of Poland.
Now, Pilsudski in his youngest years was, you mentioned me yesterday, was an ally of Lenin and the Bolsheviks.
Yeah.
How did he help him? Just briefly.
Yeah. Let's see here. Pilsudski had no illusions about the Bolsheviks. He had personal experience of collaborating with them. He had, at the age of 19, supplied Lenin's elder brother with the explosives for the bomb intended for Tsar Alexander III. They included a number of Polish socialists with whom he had close dealings. He was well acquainted with their real aim and means they used to achieve them. And Pilsudski was being urged by the Allies, most energetically the British Secretary of State for War, Winston Churchill, to press on into Russia and the support of the Whites. But whatever he may have thought of Lenin and the Bolsheviks, he preferred to deal with them than with the White Russian government, particularly as Denikin had made clear he viewed the emergence of an independent Poland with distaste and regarded most of her territory as Russian. Pilsudski therefore concluded a secret armistice with Lenin, which allowed the latter to withdraw some 40,000 men from the Polish front and to redeploy them against Denikin.
Yeah. Just a little historic context for those who don't know Polish-Russian history. The White Russians were fighting against the Bolsheviks in Russia in the Russian Civil War to prevent the Marxists from taking over the country. But because the White Russians wanted to maintain the dominions of the Russian Empire, which included the subjugation of Poland, Pilsudski was not in favor of working with the Allies in Russia. He was more in favor of working with the Bolsheviks, who wanted an independent Poland, but they wanted an independent Marxist Poland. So it was a turbulent political situation. After the Great War, how did Russia begin to grow as a communist country?
In parts, there had been 7 invasions and 7 destruction retreats. Many hundreds of thousands had died of starvation. The homes of millions had been destroyed, and the people in those areas were living in hovels. Their agricultural implements had been depleted, their animals had been taken by armies, their crops had been only partly harvested. Industry in the cities was dead from lack of raw materials. The people were unemployed and millions were destitute. They had been flooded with rubles and kronen, all of which were now valueless. The railroads were barely functioning. The cities were almost without food. Typhus and other diseases raged the whole provinces. Lenin guessed that it was not. He and his comrades also believed that history was on their side and that no bourgeoisie government, such as that currently running Poland, could possibly stand up to the force of Bolshevism. Lenin ordered the formation of an army of the West, which was instructed to carry out reconnaissance in depth in the wake of the evacuating German troops. An operation code name Target Vistula. On 5th January 1919, after a short battle with the small unit of the local Polish irregulars, it occupied Vilnius, capital of the erstwhile Grand Duchy of Lithuania. A true component of the pre-partition Polish state. In February, a Soviet Socialist Republic of Lithuania, Belarusia, was set up under Russian protection, with its capital at Minsk, and the Soviet government in waiting for Poland was constituted in Russia under the leadership of the Polish communist Józef Unislist. The three international of the Communist Party, or Comintern, was scheduled to meet in Moscow on March 4th to watch over the imminent triumph of revolution throughout the world.
Yeah, so most people think the Russian Revolution was just an attempted Marxist takeover in Russia. But actually, at the same time, the Marxists of Europe were attempting to establish a communist state in Poland, in Germany, in Austria, in Hungary, in Romania, and Czechoslovakia, and Slovakia, all over Europe. They saw it as their time to seize power everywhere. And that's the context. They failed, obviously, in all those other nations. But it was Pilsudski, who was a devout international socialist's love for his own country, which actually ends up saving Poland from communism. And so we spoke of his relations with Lenin. Let's talk about the groups that are going to be involved in this Battle of Vistula, which we'll talk about tomorrow. First, there's the Red Army, and then there is, which is the Russian Army, and then there was the Polish Army. How was the Red Army formed? Where does it come from? And because you have the Tsarist Empire, they were defeated, and Germany owns most of the Ukraine. Where does this Red Army come from?
Man, we all heard about, and not Lenin. Trotsky. Oh boy, what a guy. What a character. Pretending to be a soldier. Desperate measures were called for, and in March 1918, Lev Davidovich Trotsky was appointed Commissar for War, To implement them, Trotsky, the epitome of the fastidious intellectual, had no military experience whatsoever, but he was a good organizer. He was also pragmatic. Just as industry needed engineers, he argued an army needed professional soldiers. He replaced Kirilenko, the Colonel Joachim Basetis, a Latvian career officer in the Imperial Army, abolished elected command, set up an officers' training school, reintroduced call-up, and reasserted the notion of discipline. Brushing aside ideological reservations, Trotsky sought out former Tsar officers who he redesignated from the status of enemies of the people to that of the specialists. He would reinstate 48,409 of them in the field commands, and a further 10,339 in administrative posts over the next 2 years, with the result that by the spring of 1920, over 80% of the Red Army's cadres would be former Tsarist officers. This presented a number of problems. Elected commanders who had been demoted to make way for the specialists often took the first opportunity to shoot them in the back. At the same time, many of the specialists proved psychologically incapable of commanding mistrustful, undisciplined troops and adapting to the exigencies of an ideological civil war. Others simply looked for the first opportunity to take themselves and sometimes the units over to the whites. And just as challenging for Trotsky was the question of how to recreate the necessary spiritu des corps and a sense of loyalty, which the Bolsheviks had so successfully undermined in the former army. His solution was to disband all existing units and feed the men piecemeal into the new formations, each of which contained a communist cell loyal to the party, a hardcore of committed men who, unlike the conscripted peasants, were apt to melt away into the countryside, were impervious to the ups and downs of war. The system worked less well in the cavalry. This was largely made up of Cossacks, whose sense of allegiance was volatile at the best of times, with the result that the entire units did change sides with astonishing frequency. For much of 1918 and 1919, Trotsky lived in his armored train continually on the move between one front and another, meting out cigarettes, encouragement, and threats. In the event, his army proved more resilient and more adaptable in the difficult condition of the Civil War than the more traditionally structured white armies, which it saw off one by one, but it was about to face a more difficult test in the Polish army.
Yeah, so Trotsky, political agitator. If you've ever seen the movie Dr. Zhivago, the man who ends up abusing and maltreating the seamstress and making her his whore, that is the figure of Trotsky under a different name. And he's the antagonist in Dr. Zhivago, the movie. The Marxists were extremely devious individuals. They infiltrated the Tsarist army and they, through propaganda, turned the peasants against the Tsar. But then they had, as you just said, the difficulty of organizing an army themselves. So the Marxists are liars. So when they say they're opposed to nobility, that's only because they're opposed to nobility who don't serve them. But if the nobility are willing to serve them, they'll take them right into their army and say they're loyal patriots and experts. And Trotsky was a big double-faced pragmatist of that sort. So the Red Army wasn't so well disciplined, but Trotsky was a better organizer than the Whites, because the Whites just weren't united. Because they having lost the Tsar, there wasn't really anything to keep them together. Now, so that's on one side, the Bolshevik army, the Red Army. What's the Polish army? Where did it come from, and who had trained them, and what was their quality like?
We wanted to meet Another famous person, he was only a major at the time, de Gaulle.
De Gaulle, really?
Uh-huh. When Piłsudski declared the rebirth of the Polish state in November 1918, the only troops on hand were 3 regiments of the Polish Wehrmacht, a couple of squadrons of cavalry, and a pool of cadets, 9,000 men in all. They were soon joined by units such as the 1st Imperial and Royal Lancers of the Austro-Hungarian army, which were composed entirely of Poles. Within the days, men from the disbanded legion and demobilized troops from the Austrian and German armies began to report for duty. Invariably, the various units of the nascent army took on the characteristics imposed by the origin of the volunteers. The former legionaries were reconstituted as the first 3 infantry divisions of the new Polish army and retained their own ethos. A different kind of force evolved in the formerly German province of Posen. Out of the armed struggle that had broken out between the Poles and the German settlers, as both groups returned home after demobilization. By the time the Germans had been ousted from the area, the Polish forces in the province had grown to 3 divisions. The men who had all received the training in the German army had a businesslike approach to soldiering. The same could not be said of the large numbers of soldiers inherited from the disintegrated Russian and Austrian armies, whereas the volunteers coming forward from every diverse background, as well as the Poles who had always lived in Poland. There were Poles whose families had lived in exile, sometimes for generations in all corners of the world. There were also people of many other ethnicities, some Polonized, others hardly speaking the language. There were Lithuanians, Tartars, Cossacks, Jews, Germans, Austrians, Hungarians, even many Russians. There were hardened professional soldiers, idealistic students, peasants, aristocrats, and socialists. The fact that many were volunteers was a mixed blessing. For a while it ensured the high degree of motivation, it also entrenched the element of individualism. The Rangers further broadened by the arrival of other existing formations from distant parts, one such of the Siberian Brigade, formed by the Allies out of Poles. Mostly prisoners of war, they had found themselves stranded in the white-occupied Siberia, which would reach Poland via Japan in 1920. Another was General Zelewski's division, which had similar origins in the Kuban region of southern Russia, and had, at the insistence of the Inti, briefly fought for Denikin. Another, the most valuable single contribution to the Polish army, was the Blue Army. This had been formed in France in 1917 from Austrian and German prisoners of war of Polish nationality and Americans of Polish origin, recruited in the United States and Canada. It was well trained, equipped, smartly uniformed in French pale blue, even supported by its own regiment of 70 tanks. A French military mission of 1,500 officers under General Paul Henrys arrived in Poland in the spring of 1919 to train the nascent army on a uniform French pattern. Literally everything needs to be rebuilt from the bottom to the top. One of them, a young major by the name of Charles de Gaulle, wrote to his mother. A few months later, he was forced to admit that the mission was having insignificant impact. A concurrent British military mission had no real role beyond observation and moral support. As commander, General Adrien Carton de Wiwart, a war hero of Belgian-Irish ancestry, who had resembled a stage pirate, having lost an eye and an arm and won a Victoria Cross in the Great War, was therefore free to indulge to the full his taste for game and wild fowl, shooting in his capacity for adventure. A good example of the state of the Polish army as a whole is provided by the description of the 6 regiments making up the 1st Cavalry Division, written by an artillery officer attached to it. The 8th Lancers were entirely Austrian in character, he writes. Discipline was good, the regiment external appearance singled it out from the rest, and no other wore saddles so smartly packed, and the stirrups and bits so well polished. The next regiment, the 9th Lancers, was a product of the fusion of the 3rd Lancers of the Austrian Landwehr with the 2nd Lancers of the Legion. The fact that most of the officers were legionaries was evident from the external appearances of the regiment. There was less of the lordliness of the 8th and more of the sense of citizen soldier. Less elegant, but more dash, less training, but more enthusiasm. The next regiment, the 14th Lancers, was nothing like the other two, but scruffily uniformed men who rode thoroughbred horses on short stirrups and carried lances, sabers, and whips tucked into their boots, struck the observer as a pack of killers of the highest caliber. Nothing in their bearing or that of their boyish 28-year-old commander, whom they addressed by his Christian name, betrayed that he was full colonel, and that during the Great War they had all served in the best regiments of the Imperial Russian cavalry. The 1st Lancers had also served on the Russian side, as in all Polish regiments. Like the 14th, they carried their lances with the nonchalance of familiarity. They looked down on the 2nd Light Horse, which had legionary origins, and the 2 regiments disliked each other. The last regiment of the division, the 16th Lancers, recruited in Poznan. Its equipment, armament, and attack were German. Everything was smart, new, and solid. The men all wore tall four-cornered shakos with a triple silver tassel and red rosette. They also wore Prussian-style woolen jackets and tall German cavalry boots. Nearly all of them had served in the German army and had followed that order and discipline were exemplary. They rode huge, bony, heavy horses overloaded with kit. They had everything: sabers, lances, bayonets, spades, gas masks, canteens. Mounting up was a major performance on account of all of this. When they had marched past the trot, they rattled and clanked like a company of knights. To observers, the 6 regiments were like so many children born of the same mother, but conceived by different fathers.
It's a very elegant description. So one thing I have to remark, though, that's really amazing is, as soon as Poland's declared free and liberated and newly returned to existence, that the Polish men from around the world gather together to defend her and sign up in her army. And that is a really amazing thing. You don't see that kind of patriotism anymore. And if Christians had that kind of patriotism in their lands, they wouldn't be ruled by Marxists, communists, and Freemasons. They would immediately take up arms and liberate themselves and establish wonderfully and beautifully prosperous Catholic states. So the Poles give an example of how Catholics, being freed from a Masonic order of things, should immediately rise up and join the military of their new countries and take to arms to defend her. So in all of this, with all these things going on, what was Lenin's big plan for Europe or for Poland? What did he want to achieve in the revolution?
Before I go back to the book, I mean, this great plan or great design was truly brilliant because they knew if they attacked Poland first, the world would come out against them. So they pulled everything back out of the Ukraine. And from the last intelligence report showed the Soviets were in Ukraine, in the capital. So the army went into the Ukraine.
The Polish army.
Mm-hmm.
So they tempted them to violate the borders.
No one was there. They just rode in. But then the great plan was revealed. And we can thank the same liberal media. And you're going to hear about it. I mean, almost every paper. Let's see. Okay. Now, they call this a failure because, well, there was nobody to encircle, to entrap, and defeat the Bolsheviks right there in the Ukraine. So it says Paderewski's failure to achieve military objective was nothing to the blunder he had committed in diplomatic terms, which was to have severe repercussions on further course of the war. He played into the hands of the Bolsheviks, who gained measurably, both at home and on the international scene. When the plans for invasion were being discussed back in January 1920, Chicherin had warned of the necessity of provoking Poland to making the first move, so the socialist government could represent itself as acting in self-defense when it launched its offensive. But Russia's attack had been a godsend in the circumstances. World opinion had forgotten that there was a war on, and up by the repudiating of the 18th century treaties of partition, the Soviet government had recognized the whole area up to the Dnieper as Polish, and nobody had much time for the Ukrainians. The Polish offensive therefore appeared to the outside world as an approached invasion of Russia. The day after the Poles entered Kiev, the new statesman of London was voicing the opinion that it was impossible for anyone who was concerned for the future peace of Europe to hope for anything but an early disaster for the Polish armies. The following day, a communist hand-off Russia committee called for boycotts. The correspondence of which was that dockers in the port of London refused to load a shipment of arms bound for Danzig or Gdansk. A week later, the executive committee of the Communist International, sitting in Moscow, issued the following manifesto: transport workers, railwaymen, dockers, seamen, do not dispatch supplies or food to Poland, for it will be used in the war against workers and peasants. Russia. German railwaymen, do not pass trains through from France to Poland. Dockers of Danzig, do not unload ships destined for Poland. Austrian railwaymen, not one train must get through from Italy to Poland. It was not just socialists and workers who ranged themselves against Poland. Large sections of the world opinion swung against it. In the anti-distant South, the British and French governments were irritated by Paderewski's unilateral action. Lloyd George was incensed. Even anti-Bolsheviks such as Churchill were annoyed that he had struck now and not in previous year, when he could have saved Denikin. Paderewski's offensive had also inadvertently cast the Soviet regime in the role of Russia's champion against perceived foreign aggression, thereby boosting its legitimacy at home. And the Bolsheviks found themselves riding a wave of national outrage at the Polish occupation of Kiev, considered to be a shrine of Russian history and culture. An appeal for volunteers yielded thousands, including many former officers who had balked at joining the Red Army in order to fight the Whites, but were more than happy to serve against the Poles in Moscow alone. 1,500 of them came forward in a space of a week amid strident call for national unity in the face of the enemy This would prove invaluable to the newly appointed commander of the Western Front. Komzat Front, Mikhail Nikolaevich Tukovsky, one of the more eye-catching personalities in the Red Army. He was 27 years old and a slim figure, swarthy complexion and lank dark hair, reminiscent of a young Napoleon. But Tukovsky, a nobleman by birth, had an innate elegance and refined, slightly epicene looks. His biographies endowed him with a lineage that included aristocrats, peasants, Italians, Tartars, a crusader, even Genghis Khan. And he certainly played upon such suppositions by indulging in behavior calculated to shock. And after that, the Russians go in full force. They begin a blitzkrieg to push Poland out of the Ukraine all the way back to the city walls of Warsaw, where they suffer defeat after defeat after defeat until finally they get back to their home soil and make the Russians super tired after their long blitzkrieg that you'll find out tomorrow.
So here we, just some background, you could see that no one wanted the Catholic state of Poland to be ruling all over Lithuania, the Ukraine, and Poland, not the communists and not the Freemasons. And see how the Freemasons in the West worked closely with the Marxists out of Russia, because the Marxists in Russia were supported by the Freemasons in the West. So yeah, Kiev is the ancient cultural capital of the Russian people, of both the Russians and the Ukrainians, because Ukrainians are really the South Russians and the Russians are the North Russians. So it was a very sensitive point for this. We see how the Marxists are very willing to attack nationalism, but when they're losing, then they call on nationalists to come and defend them. So this is one of the big problems in politics and geopolitics of the modern world. People who do not represent the Christians of a nation are very willing to say the Christians of the nation should serve them because the country needs them. We're under attack. But once they get back in power and peace is fine, then they go and persecute the Christians. So you can see that the Marxists there in Russia are using the same tactics as the Freemasons in the West, and you should hopefully remember this example. But one small note is Warsaw and Kiev are far from one another. I think it must be 700, 800 miles. But it's all rolling plains. It's all like the prairies of Nebraska and Kansas. So armies can move through it very quickly, and borders can change very quickly. So that's why the Poles could advance so quickly on Kiev, and they actually had their cavalry, I think, was the ones who entered the city. And you can learn more about this war, the Polish-Soviet War, on a channel on YouTube called The Great War, who did some excellent videos on it. And so that sets up the thing. Poland now is in a horrible situation. The Bolsheviks are ready to capture Warsaw, and that would be the end of Poland. And if it would exist after this, it would be a communist, atheistic state. And that was the tragedy of Pilsudski's overreach. He had awakened the bear of Russia, and he had offended all his supply lines in the West. So what's he going to do now?
Yeah. I mean, he had permission of the Ukrainian government to go in. They wanted to join him to fight the Bolsheviks. And last intelligence report was like, they were right there. So he's like, why don't you come in, help us? But the towns are empty. And all the papers around the world and all the Bolsheviks around the world turned on him.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to note that the Bolshevik Central Committee there in Moscow is sending commands to workers in non-communist countries, just like Black Lives Matter and Antifa are sending commands to groups around the United States and around the world to cause political mayhem, to acts of terrorism, and burning things down. It's very analogous. It's working in the same way. Shows you that these people are not loyal to their nation. They're loyal to an international socialist organization of terror. And this is the one organization that should have been removed and has not been removed in more than 150 years. And they're a threat to peace everywhere.
Yeah. Before we close, they are now a threat again in Poland. As if you follow news on Twitter out of Poland, they are causing havoc, committing actual crimes by putting gay flags on statues, on saints, attacking images of Our Lady. And yesterday they put a rainbow flag draped around Pope John Paul II. And I wrote to newly elected for another 5 or 10 years, however their presidency works over there. President Andre over there. I'm not writing you as an American on Twitter. I'm writing to you as a Pole and one of the members who are still remaining of the Piast dynasty. Make an example out of these Marxist terrorists. Revoke their citizenships. Throw them away for life. Punish them. They need to be punished and dealt severely.
Yeah, it's really terrible what's going on there in Poland. There's an organization called Ordo Juris. You can find them on the web, ordojuris.pl. And they're a Catholic legal group that is defending Poles in Poland from these Marxist groups who are trying to defame professors, remove politicians from power, anyone who stands in the way of their globalist gay agenda. They're very vicious. They're pro-abort. And they try to violate every possible law, and they're all funded by German socialists and by Soros, this open society. Fortunately, there's a lot stronger laws in Poland against organizations receiving foreign funding for destabilizing the state or defacing or offending the cultural monuments of the people. So there is a legal recourse there that they have that doesn't exist in many other nations, but still these organizations are there trying to bring down the Polish state.
Mm-hmm. Only way to deal with them was with absolute might and crush them.
Yeah, they try to exploit the democratic system for undemocratic reasons. So this has been a very interesting program. Now was set up because on this Saturday is the 100th anniversary of the miracle of the Vistula, where Our Lady of Czestochowa appears to defend the Polish people, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow. What happened? Who saw it? What does it mean? What does it signify? What did it result? What was the results? How Poland's liberty was defended by it, and what does it mean for us today? It'll be a very interesting program about Our Lady's miracle on the Vistula on August 15th, 1920.
Yep. We still need you to support the Beirut Humanitarian Relief Fund. It is growing again, thankfully. And I want to thank our amazing Polish benefactor on that. That was truly amazing to hear. Thank you for that huge donation in Polish currency. All you Polish out there, please support this Beirut Humanitarian Relief Fund. And I'll put it out there on Twitter again to our UK Catholic followers, and see if they can hopefully support it. Some of you have out of the UK and Ireland. Thank you. to some of our famous pro-life Catholics in America, who are Governor Abbott, Kayleigh McEnary, the press secretary for President Trump. I also tagged Mrs. Trump since she's Catholic, reminding them that Beirut is a Catholic city and that Lebanon is a Christian country, and that, yeah, foreign aid and all that with the countries are good, but got to remember, Lebanon is Christian. You gotta make sure it stays Christian.
That's true. And I want to thank to the 4 individuals who each donated $1,000. I also want to thank that Polish donor who donated 1,000 zlotskis. I hope I'm pronouncing the currency correctly. And so I myself donated $1,000 of the money people give me for my monthly expenses. I'll live a bit more frugally in the next few months. So I don't have an income. I don't have a pension fund. I don't have any health insurance. So if I can do that, anyone can make a sacrifice, but especially those of you who have a pension fund, have investments, especially you lawyers. There's a lot of lawyers out there that listen to what I say or follow me on social media. I haven't seen any of you yet make a $1,000 donation. Some of you can make a $10,000 donation. So you want to know what it means to be noble, to be a true Catholic crusader, a true brother of Christ. Well, this is a way of doing it through the Beirut Humanitarian Fund. And let us not forget that Our Lady herself has great love for the Lebanese people. Our Lord himself, if you look in the Gospels, our Lord never worked a miracle for an unbeliever except one, and that was the Syro-Phoenician woman whose son had died. Well, who's a Syro-Phoenician? That's a Lebanese. So the one miracle he does in the Gospel for a foreigner, it's for a Lebanese woman who's lost her son, and he raises the son back to life. And I'm sure it's the will of our Lord Jesus Christ that through us, his faithful around the world who are Catholics, that the city of Beirut be raised back to life through our work of charity. And this is a chance for you to do it. I don't have a penny. AJ is homebound. He's not wealthy, but you who are listening to this program, you do have the funds. So we currently have raised $10,000. We're going to need to raise significantly more funds to begin anything. So I ask you to continue to be generous and spread the word. And if you're a lawyer and have given, ask your fellow lawyers, if you're on an email or Facebook group, to join in this, because, and if you're a professional, do the same thing. And if you've already given, please spread the word on social media. Because if you give money to the Red Cross, only like 60% of that actually ends up there, if it ends up there at all. In 9/11, the $59 billion that the Red Cross received just went up in smoke, and they never told anyone what they did with it. And it didn't go to New York City, I don't think. So Red Cross is there, UNICEF is there, all the Masonic organizations are there saying, give us money, give us money. Social media is banning you from knowing any Catholic organization raising funds. They all want you to give your Christian money to support Masonic or Islamic organizations to rebuild Beirut for the Freemasons or for the Muslims. None of those groups want Catholic Beirut to rise again. None of them want the Armenians or the Catholics to come back. And only, I think, as far as I know, we're the only international organization that's humanitarian that started a fundraiser immediately. We started within 12 hours of the disaster. I think it was 10 hours. And we're apolitical, and we're not affiliated with any particular church, although we are Catholics. And our funds go directly to helping Christians. They're not going to go to political parties. They're not going to go to the government. They're not going to go to Masonic or Islamic or Marxist relief organizations. They're going to go to actually helping individual Christians who've been impacted by this disaster. So we don't, neither AJI take an income. We don't have any salaries at Order Militaris Inc. Everything donated to Humanitarian Fund will go to humanitarian aid. So I think you can't do better if you want to help as a Catholic, the Catholics of Beirut, and have a true Catholic impact there, and not one that's manipulated or filtered for other people's agendas and purposes. So I would like to see you all help us raise at least $250,000 or $1 million so that we can have a true impact there, because as you have heard reported, the damages will go up to $10 to $15 billion. And many people have lost their homes and will never have a home again and will be living on the street. There are currently hundreds of thousands living on the street because they can't live in their houses. They could fall down any moat to structure and sound. So the winter is fast approaching, and we need to be quick about this. We can't sit around and, you know, spend a month. So I know there's a lot of people on social media who know about so many problems in the world, they never react to anyone. But this is one that we Catholics should react to by an actual action, and a sacrificial and generous one. Now, I understand with the shutdown, a lot of people financially have been hurt by that. I'm not talking to that class of Catholic. I'm talking about those who have not been financially impacted or have pension funds, they have investments. So some of you have hundreds of thousands of dollars for your pension. Donate at least 1,000 or 10,000 or 5,000. For people who have no pension fund, have no place to live, have lost their jobs and their city's been destroyed, not to mention any kind of chemical residue that might result in the city, because there's reports of, you know, radioactivity there.
And,
so please be generous.
And food there is, I mean, expensive.
Yes, it's expensive in the United States. So the income is like 1/20th or 1/40th of the United States. So you can imagine. So, and if you'd like to make a donation, go to ordo-militaris, just like Ordo Militaris .us, and you'll see a link right at the top for the Beirut Humanitarian Fund. You can donate in one of 30 currencies and in something like 8 different payment methods. Okay, Apple Pay, Google Pay, Visa, MasterCard, debit card, credit card, Sofort, Idea, Bitcoin via Google Pay. You can donate cash through Google Pay also. You can make a donation by your PayPal of your PC or tablet or Apple computer. So there's all different ways to help this fund. And I thank you all in general. We don't have the staff for me to write everyone back who's donating. I'm sorry about that, but that's because we don't use your money for our expenses. Okay.
Yep, all the link to the fundraiser will be in the description, in the comments. Please go there, share it, promote it, donate. At the store here, you could buy a bag of flour and a few other things to make a loaf of bread for a few bucks. There, not so. I mean, how much is a bag of flour there?
A 5 pound, in the United States, I think they sell 3 pound bags of flour. So that, and you know what the cost in the United States is. In Beirut, it would be $5.25 US, where the daily income per half the population is $4. So $5 for a bag of flour. So how could you even buy a bag of flour? And you can't live on flour and eggs. You know, a dozen eggs there is $2.40. And that's about the same price as in the U.S., depending where you are in the U.S. and what kind of eggs they are. Yeah. But when you make 20 to 40 times more on average than they make, for them to buy that food costs them 20 to 40 times more of their income. And so where, you know, the international aid is going to come there right now in the first few weeks and help everyone give them money. But in 3 months from now, they're all going to be gone, and Beirut, it will still be destroyed. And those countries that made pledges, they only pledged 280 million when they should have pledged 15 billion. They're going to forget Lebanon. And why? Because they want the Muslims to rush in and make Beirut a Muslim city. Because Beirut is one of the most important ports in the Mediterranean for the Mideast. If Muslims control that port, then Christians will be strangled out of the Mideast because they won't be able to ship anything in and out without being robbed or harassed. So it's strategically one of the most important Christian cities, and it's an ancient Christian city. It's been Christian since the time of Christ in the world, in the Mideast. And if we don't help them, they have no hope, because they're not going to get help from Masonic countries like the U.S. or France, who say they're going to help, but the money's all going to go to Masonic organizations. And they're not going to get help from churches that have been taken over by Marxist organizations, and we can mention our own in that. And they're not going to be helped by Islamic organizations, okay? And they're not going to be held by these groups that claim that they're not affiliated with any religion, because those are all Masonic groups. And how many have just started their fundraisers, GoFundMes, They never have ever done anything in Lebanon, and now they want your money to help Lebanon. Yeah. Yeah. We were helping Lebanon in 2017. Okay. So, and not only we've helped the parish in Lebanon, I've also financially assisted a religious monastery in Lebanon. So I think through Order Militaris's Beirut Humanitarian Relief Fund, you can help in the best possible way and have a truly Catholic impact in saving the Catholics and helping the Catholic victims of Beirut.
Yep. So thank you for all the help. Please continue help. And please stay tuned for an exciting conclusion about the miracle of Vistula. And I will look up for more information about the apparition. It only gives a short thing about it because the Poles didn't see it. They had to hear it from the Russians. They were fighting. Like, what?
Don't let it out of the bag. Don't do a spoiler. Save it for tomorrow.
All right. This is Order Militaris Radio TV signing off. Day is full.
Day is full.